Okay, so our new season is going to start from Vayera, new season of Avodas HaParsha. We'll have to fill in on the other Parshas at some point when we get. So again, we try to focus on some kind of topic that's going to help us in our Avodas Hashem. And it's usually what seems to be a very small topic in the Parsha, but every small topic you start to delve into, just doors open, and it becomes huge. So the one we're looking at this week is the laughter of Sarah. Okay, Sarah's laughter. And the questions on it really go from here till who knows when. First of all, right, that Avraham Avinu was already told in last week's Parsha. Right, there's going to be Hine ben Sarah Ishtecha, that Sarah, your wife, is going to have a son. And Hashem even told him because of Shmo Yitzchak, he's going to be called Yitzchak. So did Avram not tell Sarah Imeinu this? Right, was it there? Why is it that when the Malachim came and said that Sarah is going to have a son, that she laughed? And it seems in the Psukim, when we look in the give and take, that Hashem says to Avram, Lama zeh tzachaka Sarah lemor. Right, and he did the famous change. It said, instead of saying Va'adoniza came, which was what the Torah said in the original laughter, right, I'm going to have a baby, Va'adoniza came, meaning my husband, Avram, is old, and Hashem changed it to Va'aniza kanti, me, I, Sarah, am old. Rashi brings that's because the Shalom, welcome, Shalom. And what is so bad to say that Avram Avinu is old? In other words, Avram Zaken Baba Yomim is old. To us, to be old is a good thing. We're not in this culture of worshipping youth. We think that Avram Avinu would be insulted that Sarah Imeinu says that he's old. What's going on with all of this? And then the back and forth, it seems to be, I didn't laugh. She said, "Lo tzachakti ki yoreya." She didn't say. She said, "I didn't laugh because she was afraid." Who is she saying that to? If Hashem said she laughed, is she? Yeah, she must have laughed. Are you saying no? I didn't laugh. It doesn't seem to make sense. And then it comes back to finish the argument. Lo ki tzachakt, but you did laugh. It almost sounds like an argument between two of us. You did, it didn't, did too. Right? Obviously, that's not what's going on. There are many, many explanations. I'll just point to a couple. The Netziv of Volozhin has a very interesting long mahalach. In the Hamik Dover Chumash, there's an extra part called the Harchiv Dover, when she goes into something. It's a very long, beautiful explanation there. We will look at one explanation in particular here from the Noam Elimelech. There are two that the Noam Elimelech brings, Elimelech of Lizhensk, and maybe have time to see a little bit of another one from the Be'er Moshe, the Ozrav Rebbe, who came from Europe to the Bronx and then lived the rest of his life in Tel Aviv. He was a very special Chacham and Talmid Chacham. Welcome back. So good to see all the... Oh, Shalom. Okay, so let's try to delve into the Noam Elimelech's Perush. Now again, Noam Elimelech is a fiercely difficult sefer. There are tzaddikim that will only learn Noam Elimelech at special times, and on Erev Shabbos after going to the mikveh or things like this. Here is a piece that I saw Belazar David Friedman brought it down in his Mipis Svarim B'Sofrim, and he says this is the piece from the Noam Elimelech that obviously must have even deeper things, but you can't explain it al pi pshat. And I liked it because it has something very psychological that can help us in our Avodas Hashem. Mm-hmm. This is the Noam Elimelech. So this is Rebbe Elimelech of Lizhensk, was one of the Talmidim of the Chosev Lublin, I believe it was. He and his famous brother, Reb Zusha, were great teachers of Hasidus in their time. So this is what he says. He says, after all the question, it says that Sarah laughed when she heard the Malachim say that she's going to have a child, right? She said, could it be? So he says like this. He explains the following way. He says, a person has to look at himself and self-examine. Be aware of your movements, be aware of your actions, and even be aware of your thoughts. I'm told something, I don't know if it's a legend, that when someone is being trained to be a pilot in the Israeli Air Force, so there's a whole section in which you have somebody like following you and observing you throughout the day. And if the potential pilot will like go into a restaurant, sit down and put salt in his soup and then taste it,
That's IBM.
he's out. That's IBM?
IBM.
Oh, okay. You're out because how are you putting soup in the salt before you taste it? You're doing it by habit. You're doing it automatically without thinking. That's puzzle. So right here, he's saying that you should be paying attention. And here's what you'll notice when you pay attention to yourself. You'll see that even a person who's a tzaddik, meaning even if you happen to be a tzaddik, sometimes you will have thoughts that are really unbefitting. A machshava lo tova. Now he says it's like a fleeting thought. He describes it ka'ov haporeach b'rega echad. It's like a bird that kind of flies through your mind very quickly. But it can be something that's, very unfitting, either something that's the opposite to emunah, or something very cynical about people. Oftentimes you'll say about a very good person, oh, they probably only care about X, Y, and Z or something. These thoughts that if we notice them, like shocked at ourselves, how did I think that? He said these fly through. Now he says, a tzaddik who does notice such a thought immediately rejects it. He doesn't want such a thought. He simply bats it away with the thought swatter, right? And away it goes. Nonetheless, it's not good that such thoughts go through us, right? So he says, and if you want to know it's true, give it a try. He says a person who doesn't look at himself, doesn't introspect, won't notice these thoughts. But if you take the time to do so, you will notice that you have them, okay, that they're there. What's this have to do with us? So he says, this is how we explain what happened with Sarah. It says, V'Sarah shomat. Sarah was listening when the Malachim said that she's going to have a child. Shahaisa ma'menes be'emes l'divrei shlichus malach Hashem. She definitely believed that, right? It was there. It says, Pesach ha'ohel. Now here he's explaining by the gate to the tent, by the entrance of the tent, somewhat allegorically, right? Meaning Pesach la'ohel ha'elyon. She was in the process of hearing prophecy, right? That's what she was hearing. When these malachim said that she was going to have children, this was a message from above. So she was like standing by the gate of the heavenly tent, and she believed it. But machma she'odam nivra beguf hagashmi va'achur. We are also physical human beings. So bilti efshari shelo yavolo ezed nidnud machshava lo tova ha'overes alav kanal. Because of our very physicality, there are thoughts that come through our mind. They aren't coming from our neshama per se. They aren't coming from our deep machshava, our deep intellect, but they come from our very physicality. This was a chiddush to me. Meaning, he says, the fact that we're physical, right? And our physical side, we know, oftentimes draws us to things that we don't want to be drawn to. He says, guess what? It even influences thoughts. There are thoughts that come from physicality. They may not relate to something physical. It's not like a thought saying, I really want pizza, right? It can be a cynical thought. It can be a thought of doubts in emunah. He says, don't be so frightened by that, because that's part of the fact that you're flesh and blood, that you have human nature. Okay, so he said this was what was happening. He brings something, again, from the world of Kabbalah that, he said, Liyodechein, this is what's called the Bechinas Achoraim. This is something that comes from behind, not from the front. That's how he explains Hu Acharov, that this is something, a thought that comes from behind the person's real thoughts in emunah. Right? So therefore, right, that went through her mind. She said, Adoni Zaken, Avram's old. Right? It came through. It's not really a logical thought to have. She immediately rejected it because she already saw that she had become young. Right? It says, Acharei Belosi, Haisali Edna, that she suddenly became like a young woman, right? So she mentioned that, and she rejected it. So therefore, it didn't bother her so much. That's why it says, Vatitzchak Sarah bekirba. Sarah laughed inside. This was like Avram Avinu's laughter, happiness. It said when Avram Avinu heard that he was going to have a child, Vayipol alpana vayitzchak. Avram Avinu fell down and laughed, right? He was samech shenas lo nes. That he said, I'm going 100 years old and I'm going to have this child. So too, Sarah was happy in that way about the great nace that was happening to her. But this thought of Adoni Zaken, right, that went through, but Avraham Avinu is so old. Right? Again, not a logical thought to have so much once miracles are happening and you're getting messages from Hashem. But these thoughts come to us by the fact that we're physical human beings. So we will have thoughts sometimes that aren't logical, that aren't spiritual, that don't make sense. And these are actually coming from that aspect of us. So Sarah brushed it away and she didn't really consider it anything because she was self-aware enough to know that people have these types of thoughts all the time. So Hashem said, Lama zet tzachaka Sarah leimor ha'afum nameleit. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked, why did she laugh and say, could I give birth? Says, even though she really believed it, but this thought was considered something on her madrega, on the level of such a tzaddikus, and even though she rejected it, she should have paid attention and said, I have to find the root of that and try to stop such thoughts from coming. Okay, and therefore, Sarah said, I didn't laugh, meaning she didn't consider that thought something that was coming from her. It was this bird that flew through her head, right? This idea that she immediately rejected. Ki yareya, because she was afraid. It wasn't she was lying to Hashem, then saying I didn't laugh because she was afraid of him. Obviously, that wouldn't make sense. But it says, because I had fear of that thought, right? I didn't laugh. I had this thought, Avraham Avinu is so old, and I feared it. Where's that thought coming from? And I immediately banished it. Nonetheless, right, it was considered something that was negative for her. So therefore, Vayomer lo kitzachakt, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted her to know that on this level of tzidkus, where she is, she has to notice a machshava like that and see that there's something that still needs to be perfected in her if such a machshava comes. Okay, so let's step back and look at this and see how it relates to us. On one hand, we're thinking we're not on such a madrega as Sarah, 100%. So on one hand, there's an nechama to us. There's a certain consolation. I do get disturbed by these thoughts that I have sometimes. You know, that you'll see a great tzaddik and this voice says, maybe he's only interested in, covet, or maybe he's only interested in people's money. Or, they say something's going to happen and you say, oh, how can that really happen? It hasn't happened for so many hundreds of years, or all sorts of different thoughts like that. They fly through the mind. If you would interview yourself, do you really feel that way? You would say no, but they're there. So first of all, he explains to us that isn't really you, right? Sometimes a person, you think such a thought, you say, is that really me? Is that deep inside who I am? He says, no, this comes from your goof. These things, they fly through your mind, and not to take them so seriously, to banish them, to bat them off. On the other hand, we learn from this that they do come from us someplace, that there is something there, and therefore, if a person really is self-aware enough and can be on that level, you can try to find the source and try to fix it up so these birds are less frequent and they're less coming in there. Now, this got me thinking that in certain ways, this is like the famous experiments they did with subliminal advertising. Right? If you remember this, I believe they said it was real, that they would show a film and they had a frame in there that went through so quickly of a picture of Coca-Cola with ice. And they discovered that more people in the movie theater would buy Coca-Cola with ice. They would not be able to tell you that they saw that image. But somehow we registered it. Okay, and it's there and it can influence you. So on one hand, we see, right, that these things can influence us. The things that we see, they can bring little thoughts, even if we reject them, but those thoughts can influence. And that's why we do have to be careful about them. The famous question asked at the end of Parshas Nasa, we have the Sota, right? And we have the Sota and we have the Nazir juxtaposed. And Rashi brings down from Chazal, why is Sota next to Nazir? Haroah Sota Pilkul Kula, if a person sees this woman who was unfaithful to her husband in a very specific halachic way, so he sees her demise, she dies in a very shocking fashion, and then Yazir Atzmo Minayayin, he will take an oath to separate himself from wine, because wine can cause a person to be too loose in their relations with the other gender. So people ask, wait, a person who saw the Sota and saw the punishment she received, that should be the person who's totally inoculated against any immorality. He saw the sin and he saw the price of sin. He should be able to drink his wine with no worries because he saw such a thing. So there are a variety of approaches, but one of the Bali Musar said, it shows you that the very exposure weakens something into you. You're going, oh, that's terrible, that's horrible, that's evil. But deep inside you is something, she was a married woman and she did that. Something has become weakened inside of you. Deep inside, you no longer look at a married woman in the same way. Right? Therefore, Yazer Atzma Min Hayayin. This world of the subconscious was known in Chazal long before Freud talked about it. Right? The idea of what's there. The idea of being honest with yourself, of realizing sometime that these thoughts are there and that they could possibly influence. So there's a fascinating story. I saw this of Shlomo Hoffman, bringing out a lot of books from him. He was a fascinating person who was a rehabilitation counselor in the Israeli prison system and a Talmud Chacham. And he was...
Without letters there.
Without a degree, right? Without a degree. It was kind of the Wild West in the beginning of the state. And he had a very close relationship with Rabbi Isaac Sher. Rabbi Isaac Sher was the son-in-law of the Alter Slobodka, and he managed to make it there. It's Yisrael. He founded the Slobodka Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, and he used to teach a lot. So he said he heard this story from Rabbi Isaac Sher, and I thought it was very eye-opening. Rabbi Isaac had to travel with the Alter of Slobodka for whatever reason to Vienna. He had to go to Vienna. And Rabbi Isaac had really been more or less in the environs of the yeshiva and, whatever non-Jews were in Slobodka in that area for many, many years. They came to Vienna, right? This was, the 1920s. And Vienna was a very cosmopolitan city, kind of like Paris, I guess. And suddenly he sees there, right, feelings of, the way people dressed and a sense of promiscuity and partying and music and dancing and all this, walking down the main street there in Vienna. And they're saying, this is disgusting, this is horrible, this is... So the Alter turned to him and he said, Zog dem emes. He said, say the truth. Bist nicht mekane? You're not jealous? He said, sometimes kina, kanos, comes from kino. Sometimes your zealotry comes from the fact that you're really jealous. Meaning, be honest about your subconscious thoughts. Right? Realize that it's true. You're saying ich, yich, etc. But part of that may come because there's a part of you that is attracted to it. Be honest with it. Don't fool yourself. If you fool yourself, then those thoughts can be working below your radar and they can get you in trouble in ways that you weren't expecting or thinking of. And so it is with the world of exposure. Like they said with that idea of the sota, right? Chazal say that you're not supposed to be asking about Avodah Zarah. Right, to be curious about different idolatries, right? How did it work? What would the priests do? How would they sacrifice? All these things. There are people that are working lotil madlasos, meaning don't learn in order to do, but learn in order to help other people from doing. Some people, their role is to help people who are drawn to idolatry or to bring them back. Just like nowadays, there are some people who are specialists in trying to help Jews back to Judaism if they've got pulled into Christianity or into other things, but even saying things that you know are ridiculous, hearing things you know are ridiculous, things that you'll say, of course I don't believe that, it goes against everything. Why expose yourself to it? Why bring those thoughts into the world that then sometimes result in these birds going across your mind and all sorts of different doubts and such? Doesn't mean that we're afraid of questions. If a person has questions, look into the Torah to answer your questions. But don't be exposing yourselves and even hearing things that are evil, hearing things that are mean, that are cruel. Certainly Lashon Hara. The Chavetz Chaim brings a very big chiddush. We know that you're not supposed to receive Lashon Hara. That's already a chiddush. The world understands you're not supposed to tell slander, let's say, even though their definition of slander is very different than our definition of Lashon Hara. By definition, Lashon Hara is true. Slander, by definition in the courts, has to be false. Okay, so that's different. But we're not allowed to be makabel, which means to believe Lashon Hara. When someone tells us something negative about someone, we're not allowed to believe it unless there are certain preconditions that are met. So now, let's say a person says, okay, my friend wants to tell me something negative about, Joe. I'll listen, but I'm not going to believe it. Let's hear what it is. So there, the Chavetz Chaim says you're not allowed to do that either, unless you feel there is a real positive purpose that could help in listening to it. Either you could help Joe or help this person or help, reframe what this person's talking about. But even Shmias Lashon Hara, even just hearing the Lashon Hara without believing it, it affects you. Don't think it doesn't affect you. All these things there. So here we have two sides of the coin. Don't be too frightened by these negative thoughts that sometimes fly through your mind and shock yourself. How could I be thinking that? Those things come from this kind of lower level of our physicality. On the other hand, don't think that these thoughts are totally harmless, right? They may not be you, but they can still cause damage, okay? And this is something a person has to be careful of, and that is one of the big problems nowadays. People are exposed to anything and everything in the world, any thought, everything, and the algorithms of all the different programs on the computer are there to draw you and show you more of something that you just peeked at. And it doesn't mean that Jews are afraid, right, that we have to live in a bubble or our emunah will shatter. No. But a person has to, just like we don't like to expose ourselves physically to things that could be bad for us, say, okay, it's a little bit of E. coli. Okay, a little bit, what can it do? A little something. But little things do end up influencing, and they spread and multiply. So to be careful with that. I'd like to go now to the second mahalach of the Noam Elimelech. He says, another thing is that a tzaddik really has to reach the level that even if something supernatural happens, it won't affect him that much. He says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything, he can do everything, right? So he says the very fact that a person says, well, this is amazing, this is miraculous, for a tzaddik, that's a certain, limitation. It's almost like he compares it to the Gemara in Maseches Brachos. If a chazan feels very poetic and he says, Akel HaGodol HaGibor VaNora in the beginning of Shmon Esrei, Hashem was great and mighty and awesome, then he starts adding in all sorts of other superlatives and adjectives. So someone did that. One of the Chacham in the Gemara who heard him said, Siyamtiu l'kula shivcha demari. Have you finished all the praise of Hashem? Meaning, we have certain words that came to us that were used by Moshe Rabbeinu, that were used in the Torah. That's what we have a mandate to say. To start making up your own adjectives for Hashem, right, saying he's great like that, that's already getting into a ridiculous territory, because anything you say, right, is almost dwarfing it as opposed to leaving it in its infinite majesty. So he says, therefore, even this Vatitzach Aksara, she was happy, right, about this amazing thing that happened, right? She saw suddenly she became like a young woman, right? So then Hashem asked, why did Sarah laugh with joy at the fact, could it be that this is happening, that I'm going to give birth, right? It's simply something I can do, that anything I can do. And Sarah was saying, right, I wasn't laughing at it. I was really happy, right? It was there. Her fear was, right, Kiyareya, she was afraid by this concept that she might have been making fun of things. She says, no, absolutely not. That very idea frightens me. I was being happy. And Avram said, lo kitzachakt, meaning even your excitement about this, even your joy, is considered a certain level of not recognizing Hashem's greatness so much. An interesting mahalach.
So,
yeah, please.
Ani zakanti, when she says that,
yeah,
what does she mean by that?
It means that I was already old, and now I'm supernaturally getting young and having a child, right? Which to any of us we'd be, totally amazed. So what can that have to do with us? Again, we're not on the level of Ram and Sarah. So there's a concept in like the Chovos HaLevavos and the Shar B'Tachon of not trying to limit the ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do what he does. Meaning, sometimes, certainly, if you do over hishtadlus, if you put too much effort, you think, whatever, our yeshiva is greatly in debt. We need to make money. We must be able to get $1 million from that donor. And you daven to Hashem, please help that donor, give us $1 million. And you do everything you can, and you think about the donor, and you send him presents, and you send his wife presents, you send his mother presents, you send all these things. So he says, if you do that, that's almost like saying the only way Hashem can help us is through that donor. That is limiting the shefa, and that will limit the shefa. You do a normal hishtadlus. If there's a person who's a potential donor, right, you approach him in a normal way, right, in the right amount of time, etc. And you realize if he gives, that's what Hashem decided. But Hashem can give us $1 million in any other way, in ways that are beyond us.
Extra davening allowed?
Extra davening to a point. In other words, for the need you can do, but not that it should come that way. You have no idea if that's the way it's supposed to come. Right? You know, Hashem, please help our yeshiva. Right? We're going to have to close down.
Don't tell him how to do it.
Exactly. Don't give eitzes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's limiting because he truly is infinite, and you want to leave that shefa in that infinite way. And therefore, you have to realize, even though you have hakara satov to the donor, you realize that was simply Hashem's way of giving it to you, but he could have done it in a variety of different ways, and to hold that. That's how that one connects to us. I'll just finish in a minute with this approach of the Be'er Moshe, who brought a very interesting thing. This was the Ozra of a Rebbe. He said, so he said, Sarah Imeinu had the following thought. She had already become like a young woman. Rashi said even her skin changed, right? She had a cycle again, all these kind of things. But Hashem didn't do such a miracle to Avraham Avinu. He still looked as old as he was, right? She was wondering, why not? Why was it that way, right? In other words, Hashem could have made me have the child as an old woman, right? And he can have Avraham Avinu have a child as an old man. He can do anything. But he made me physically young, and he didn't make Avraham Avinu physically young. Why is that? What's going on? So the answer that Kodesh Baruch Hu said, "Hayipalei me Hashem davar," is anything beyond me. At this time I will come back to you next year, and Sarah will have a child. Meaning, the reason she was thinking, right, trying to again say, why is Hashem doing it this way as opposed to that way? And why did he make me young and not make Avraham Avinu young? So he explains, if Sarah had remained as her, chronological age, so then Yitzchak would not have been a natural child born to Sarah. He would have been a miracle child. It wouldn't really be Hinei l'Sarah ben. It wouldn't really be a ben to Sarah. And it was very important that she should have that child, because they say when Sarah Imeinu had that child, many women who were barren were then open and able to have children. And we're talking all about natural childbirth, not miraculous childbirth. So she had to open that up, right? And this is why later when Yitzchak was born, everyone will laugh with me. That's a laughter of joy, right? This is what's happening. So Avraham Avinu, that wasn't necessary. In other words, the ikar had to be that he was born of a woman. We know that it can get troublesome in our history if people say is a miraculous child who wasn't really born from a woman. So this was the idea. There was something there, and oftentimes, and it was just a fleeting thought that she had, and it wasn't something that was saying that Hashem couldn't do things. It was almost like a curiosity, a surprise, right? But to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has reasons for everything he's doing, and once again, he doesn't need our eitzes. And this should hopefully give us hope. Our situation in so many ways, in the war and other things, part of what disheartens people so much is you don't see where is it going to end, how can it stop, all these kind of things. Remember, right, who's in charge and who can do anything and bring things. Our entire history, if you step back and look, has been in surprising ways that nobody else could have thought or imagined. Hopefully we'll see such Yeshua's b'mehera b'yameinu.
Amen.